I like big plays, you like big plays, every fantasy football manager likes big plays, but the big question is just how sustainable are they? And that, ladies and mostly gentlemen, is the question for today's video. We are looking at 5 of the biggest overperforming football players from the first 6 weeks of the 2023 season and going to attempt to decipher just how sustainable their high-end efficiency will be for the rest of the season. As always, it's a great day to be great. First up, we're talking about 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy and Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa because, let's face it guys, both these quarterbacks seem to face the same criticism week after week. They are perceived as system quarterbacks, simply being propped up by 2 of the league's single best offenses in terms of skill position weaponry, alongside 2 of the league's single brightest play callers out there. So yes, guess what? The offensive environments in Miami and San Francisco are indeed awesome, and shout out to Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel for being really good at their jobs. But at the end of the day, style points don't really matter in real life or fantasy football, and Purdy and Tagovailoa are 2 of the single most efficient passers in all of football right now. EPA per dropback, completion percentage over expected, passer rating, yards per attempt, whatever advanced passing metric you want to pick, there's a good chance you're going to see Purdy and Tagovailoa near the top of the leaderboard. And thus far, that has resulted in some pretty great fantasy production. Purdy is a QB 13 on a per game basis through the first 6 weeks of 2023, whereas Tua is all the way up there as the QB 4. Now, the whatever the grand prize in your fantasy league is dollar question, can they keep it up? In Purdy's case, I am optimistic that we should continue to see him work as a borderline QB1 in Fantasyland, and a large reason why is the fact that neither Deebo Samuel nor Christian McCaffrey are tentatively expecting to miss much, if any time, due to their respective injuries, per ESPN's Adam Schefter. And even if we do see them just sit out a week or two, relatively soft matchups are on the horizon against the Vikings and the Bengals before the team's Week 9 bye, and lest we forget, still plenty of explosive playmakers in San Francisco in the name of Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. So Brock Purdy left some meat on the bone last week against the Browns. Also was a very bad matchup in some pretty tough weather, and the man still found a way to put them in position to win the game at the end, just couldn't quite make that field goal. So bigger statistical performances on the horizon with a more healthy group of skill position players. Brock Purdy remains a borderline QB1 for me the rest of the way. I maintain similar optimism for Tua Tagovailoa. Maybe he won't, continue to post those top 4 fantasy finishes the rest of the way. Having an absolute non-existent rushing floor is not going to help his cause there. That said, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mike McDaniel, these guys aren't going anywhere, and I have a hard time believing that we're going to see defenses overly catch up to what's going on in Miami all that quickly. So far, guys, the greatest show on Surf has utilized pre-snap shifter motion on a league-high 86% of their snaps. Meanwhile, the 49ers at 79% are the only other teams ahead of the 75% mark. So pretty much playing different brands of offensive football in Miami and San Francisco. Don't be surprised if both of these game managing system QBs that just happen to be inside of the best systems in the entire NFL keep on supplying some rather great fantasy goodness throughout the rest of the way. All right, guys, up next, I want to talk about Jets running back Breece Hall, who is averaging a league-high 6.4 yards per carry this year if you move that threshold high enough to just, bump Devin Achane off the top spot. But with Breece Hall, seriously, guys, plus 3.1 fantasy points above expectation. He has truly smashed whatever anyone thought was possible inside of the Zach Wilson-led attack. But will it continue? Because as we have seen, even just mediocre quarterback play is such a relief to see from Zach Wilson, because that's how low that bar was to start his career. So, hey, things are getting better. I'm not trying to bash Zach here. I'm just saying, with Breece Hall, it's fair to wonder, will he continue to average more yards per carry than almost anyone in NFL history, and how plentiful will the scoring opportunities be in New York? Yes, I am worried about that. But you know what I'm not worried about is the fact that Breece Hall is finally getting the sort of RB1 level volume that his talents deserve. I mean, look at this utilization on the screen right now, guys. You can see how this was truly a 3-headed committee during the first month of the season. But over weeks 5 and 6, Breece is coming on strong and finally getting that workhorse role we were looking for. Through the first 6 weeks of 2023, Breece was only the RB 35 in expected fantasy points per game, so there's a good chance that as we see that number go way up, it'll offset any diminishing returns that we have in the efficiency and scoring departments. Look, at the end of the day, there are 4 key variables that make up pretty much any fantasy football start-sit decision: volume, talent, offensive environment, and matchup. And guess what, guys? Volume is at the top for a reason, and the fact that Breece is moving so strongly in the right direction makes me more confident than ever that he will be able to overcome any deficiencies in his ever high efficiency department. So yes, again, not the most, glorious offensive environment. We don't have Breece Hall playing for the Dolphins or anything over here, but again, having that RB1 level volume is so important for someone like Breece, overcoming some additional problems along the way. He is a rock solid RB1 for me throughout the rest of 2023. All right, up next, I want to talk about Texans wide receiver Nico Collins, who is in the midst of a breakout season in the CJ Stroud-led passing attack, and he's not just doing so on volume, guys. When you actually look at the efficiency measures here, absolutely wild stuff. Through 6 weeks, Nico Collins has been a top 6 wide receiver in the NFL in terms of PFF receiving grade, yards per reception, yards per route run, and passer rating when targeted. Still though, the thing that really surprised me was heading on over to Next Gen Stats and finding out that Nico is tied with Deebo Samuel for having the most yards after the catch per reception above expectation. Now, that is a mouthful, I admit, but all we're talking about here is Nico is consistently racking up yards after the catch that we wouldn't otherwise overly expect, and even just a quick look at the film fully backs up this notion. That's the good news. Nico Collins, certified baller. But the bad news is that we just haven't quite gotten that wide receiver 1 level volume that we would like to see alongside those demonstrated skills. Overall this season, Robert Woods actually maintains a 1 target lead over Nico on the Texans, and even his air yard shares haven't been anything to overly write home about. Overall, we do see Nico alongside guys like Adam Thielen, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Puka Nacua, more so underneath intermediate receiving options on their respective teams. So while I do think Nico will continue supplying some wide receiver 2 goodness, his current standing as a wide receiver 14 in PPR points per game might be a bit closer to his ceiling than floor, considering this offense, when they have a healthy Tank Dell, which should be the reality following their Week 7 bye, is more of a 1A, 1B, 1C passing game than most might otherwise expect. So Nico Collins, still very much a rock solid wide receiver 2 the rest of the way. I just wouldn't be surprised if he finishes a bit closer to that wide receiver 24 mark as opposed to wide receiver 12. And finally, guys, we have breakout Lions rookie tight end Sam LaPorta. Now, I'm well aware that Sam LaPorta was a popular, preseason sleeper pick, late round tight end option, and I was lucky enough to draft him in a handful of leagues myself. That said, guys, I don't think even the most devoted truthers had any idea that this was coming, and by this I mean LaPorta quite literally working as arguably the single most efficient tight end not named Travis Kelce. This assertion is true in terms of PFF receiving grade, yards per route run, and targets earned per route run, while we also see top 10 numbers in yards per reception and yards after the catch per reception. Pretty good. And guess what? The much anticipated return of Jameson Williams has really done nothing to stop LaPorta's hype train, as he actually saw a season high 11 targets in JMO's Week 6 action. And honestly, guys, that was also while playing through a calf injury. So if we've learned one thing from the Detroit Lions offense this year, it's that Ben Johnson and Jared Goff are absolutely for real. Don't be surprised if LaPorta keeps on keeping on as a legit top 5 fantasy football tight end, thanks to his status as a clear-cut top 2, top 3 pass game option inside of one of the NFL's most explosive offensive attacks. All right, guys, that's it from me. Make sure you let me know in the comments any additional overperforming players you think are set to regress, or maybe we'll just keep on keeping on because they are ballers after all. As always, it's a great day to be great. Best of luck in Week 7. Go win those fantasy matchups.